10%. This is how much the Chinese economy grew on average from 1979 to 2010. If the figure doesn't impress you much, then compare this with Germany, USA, Singapore, India. I doubt we'll ever find a country in the world that has managed to maintain such a robust pace of development for 3 decades. China was outpacing the rest of the world, and this is not just a metaphor. The Middle Kingdom grew 3 times faster than the world average. The Chinese economy has grown 23 times in 30 years. A poor, agrarian country turned into the world's second-largest economy. It looked like a miracle, the Chinese economic miracle. But then, something went wrong. 2010 was the last year when the Middle Kingdom saw double-digit growth rates. 9, 8, 7, 6. The gap with the global average began to narrow. The numbers are still good, but the period of miracles appears to be over. In this video, we'll find out why China's economic machine is running out of fuel, whether the country is in danger of stagnation, and how it could affect everyone. Ni hao, and enjoy watching. Let's start by saying that China's economic miracle is not that much of a miracle. After his death in 1976, the great leader Mao Zedong left the country in hunger and poverty. China's GDP was $154 billion, 12 times lower than the US. And if you look at GDP per capita, you can absolutely tear up. In China, it was $165 against $8.5 thousand in the States and $1.5 thousand on average in the world. 51 times lower than America and 9 times lower than the world average. In our story of China's frantic growth, we need to remember such a concept, the low base effect. For example, if your entire fortune is $150, then even an accidentally found $50 on the street will immediately increase your capital by as much as a third. The lower you fall, the stronger will be your percentage growth. But in absolute terms, you will still not become a millionaire, even if you find $50 every year. China of that time was in a similar situation. It doubled its GDP in just 4 years. It reached the $300 billion mark in 1980. Despite the doubled growth, the economy still remained modest. The gap with the USA was 15 times, that is, even greater than before. In comparison to the leading European economies, they all have the same trajectory as China, and after 1985, they all surge ahead in a united burst. So, where's the miracle in that? But the miracle begins in 1992. The Middle Kingdom's economy starts cruising at full speed. In the 2000s, it surpasses, well, not America, but Italy, next year France, then Britain, and completes the hot streak with Germany. The explanation for this is the market economy. May the communists forgive me, but in 1992, the Chinese government announced a reform of the economic system and a transition from a planned model to so-called market socialism. What is a socialist market economy? It is an organic combination of the advantages of socialism as a social regime and the market economy as a mechanism for the distribution of resources. Through such a synthesis, a comprehensive positive effect is achieved. Until then, in China, socialism was opposed to a market economy. Classical Marxist theory believes that in a future society, private ownership of the means of production will be replaced by public ownership. Once society has acquired them, commodity production will be abolished. This effectively means that socialism and private property are irreconcilable antagonists. However, the experience of establishing a market economy in China casts doubt on the above views. Whereas the Soviet Union failed to transition from a planned economy to a market economy and had to collapse while going through misery, pain, and poverty, China artificially rebuilt itself while maintaining macroeconomic control of the government, and the market took the decisive role in resource allocation. They used two principles: deregulation and opening the country to foreign investment. Did a miracle happen? Well, against the backdrop of the economic collapse of the 90s in the CIS and Eastern Europe, China was the MVP, while everyone else's economy was being destroyed by the invisible hand of the market. It surged forward like a tank, turning into a global industrial giant. However, it's not that simple either. There's one important detail we haven't taken into account so far: population. Until recently, China had the largest number of citizens in the world, and it kind of makes sense that a large economy is due to a large population. Well, not in each case, of course. But the idea is, what a bloody miracle is that if it's just China taking the place it was meant to? But before giving kudos to China, I want to give respect to you, our subscribers. I see all your comments and thank you very much for trying to help us, but we still don't have 50,000 subscribers, so don't slow down. However, with China, it's more complicated. Before giving it kudos, we first need to look at a metric that purges the influence of a large number of citizens: GDP per capita and by purchasing power. Well, that's because a bowl of rice will cost differently in China and the US, though the nutritional value is the same. Let's have a look at how GDP per capita by PPP changed for different players. To start with a global average. Russia, by comparison, fell in the mid-90s, but has since rebounded strongly and is now in a much better state than the world average. Of the post-Soviet countries, Kazakhstan has a similar situation, but it is much more surprising that the Baltics, without oil and gas resources under their feet, have traveled the same path, even a little more successfully. But China's picture is quite different. Yes, it did not fail in the 90s, but even without it, it was far below the Soviet countries, and it reached the world average only 4 years ago, in 2020. Going from poor to average in 40 years is a bit of a stretch of an economic miracle, don't you think? Okay, let's not be too harsh. After all, most third world countries are not even able to reach the average level. So let's give the Chinese reformers their due. Deng Xiaoping lifted the country out of poverty. Jiang Zemin made China a global factory, and Hu Jintao made China the world's second largest economy. What did his successor Xi do? Well, on the face of it, things are not bad. Under Chairman Xi, the economy has continued to grow. GDP has once again doubled in the last 10 years. The gap with the US has shrunk from 47% to 30%, and in PPP terms, China surpassed it back in 2016. But China's GDP is a pretty tricky thing. In the previous video about China, I talked about the thousands of unfinished houses and ghost towns that have left the Chinese property market in a deep crisis. A particularly rapid phase of construction began exactly in the 2010s due to the build-up of debt for new buildings. Except that people told to these buildings are strong. No. And right now, property developers are defaulting one after another. What was once one of the drivers of Chinese GDP growth has turned out to be the biggest debt crisis of the last decade. Such a situation is not only in the construction industry. This is how many railways were laid in 2008, and this is how many 12 years later. Furthermore, many trains can rip at 300 kilometers an hour. A miracle? Hell yeah, it is a miracle. But only the railway operator's debt is $900 billion. This amount is comparable to 5% of GDP. That's 3 times more than Evergrande, a bankrupt top 4 developer. So, be careful. GDP is a convenient metric, but it is still a facade. Everything may look large-scale and impressive, but only until you look into the finances. Then it turns out that the construction was carried out in debt. There is no return on investment, the project is not profitable, and sometimes it is not in demand at all. But the GDP is growing. It is possible to drive on fuel from large-scale but economically inefficient construction projects for some time, impressing the whole world with the next global projects and capturing updated GDP records. But it will be possible to do this only as long as there are investors ready to finance these projects. If they leave, this machine will stop, and the time will come to pay the debts. And it seems that this time is coming. Okay, let's say foreign investors lose interest in China, but the biggest investor remains the state. It is its money that should be used to build such projects, even if unprofitable but socially significant. But even here a problem appears. The thing is that infrastructure construction in China is financed by the provinces. They do it through special financial instruments, LGFV. And what would you think? This is the most real capitalist derivative in socialist China. It works as follows. A province raises money through the LGFV to implement an infrastructure project in its territory. Thanks to the investment impetus, new residential areas, shopping malls and metro stations grow on it. Municipal land becomes more expensive. Accordingly, the income from its lease grows and tax revenues in the future as well. The municipality uses these revenues to pay off its LGFVs. And now we remember the video about the real estate crisis in China. Since developers are now going bankrupt en masse and construction is frozen, municipalities have no one to lease land to, and the price of land is falling. So, there is no money to pay the debts. In that video, we said that the crisis in the construction sector has pulled shadow banks with it, and now it turns out that the state finances are being dragged down as well. They've not defaulted so far, but there was one hot case where LGFV was overdue in December, but after the information was made public, the payment was made in January. This is, to put it mildly, a worrying sign. Well, the state will surely help them in case of emergency. Well, it will try very hard, or rather it is already trying. The question is, where will it find so many resources to pay off its debts? They owe much? Well, from what is known, the figure is said to be $10 trillion. Sounds like a lot, right? Well, how can I put it? Basically, it's almost like the GDP of Germany, UK, and France combined, while everyone is discussing the US debt. The answer here seems obvious. The Chinese economy is so huge that if it collapses, it will pull the rest of the world with it, just as the sinking Titanic pulls everything floating nearby into its vortex. But let's try to assess the scale of the problem in more detail. For starters, Russia. For Russia, Big Brother's prosperity is especially important now. Trade with China has accounted for 15 to 20% of exports in different years. Is that a lot? Yes, it is more than with any other country, but in 2020, for example, all Russian exports fell by the same 20% compared to 2019. And in 2015, they fell by more than 30% compared to 2014. So even if we imagine that China stopped purchasing stuff from Russia altogether, it would not cause a crisis more severe than in 2014, and certainly would not be a catastrophe. However, one could argue that Russia's trade with the United States in 2008 accounted for about 5% of the total, but the American mortgage crisis shook not only the whole world but also Russia. Can the same story be repeated now? Here we address Nobel laureate Paul Krugman. In his article last year, he cited a figure of $515 billion. This is the amount the United States has invested in the Chinese economy, and American exports to China are $150 billion, less than 1% of GDP. From this, Krugman concludes that the direct impact of the Chinese crisis on the US economy will be insignificant. The economies of Germany and Japan are more strongly tied to China, and theoretically the crisis could be transmitted through them, but in any case the financial ties of the Western world with America in 2008 were incomparably stronger than with today's China. So we should not expect a new global financial crisis, according to Krugman. Meanwhile, in Russia, one can find triumphant headlines in the media that trade turnover with China is growing every month. Together with the decline in trade volumes with developed, that is, Russia-unfriendly countries, it is reaching record highs with its eastern partner. Therefore, by tying business heavily to one player, Putin must hope that the Middle Kingdom will continue to actively purchase oil, gas, and other resources. To be clear, China is a top 2 oil consumer. As you've noticed, oil consumption growth correlates with GDP growth. It takes fuel to create an economic miracle. China's role in resource consumption is so large that as soon as there is positive news about industrial production, global oil prices react immediately. Over the past decades, the PRC economy has been a driver for the rest of the world, and it is China that has largely bestowed the growth of prosperity on us. So let's hope that if anything, China's slowdown is offset by the development of India's, maybe not a miracle, but a significant rise. More and more it is raising its own standard of living by integrating into the world economy. More and more, it consumes fuel. But that's another story. Now we want to say a huge thank you for our guys from Patreon. Share this video with your friends, hit the like button, and shitpost in the comments. And I'm the researcher.